As I say, the reason we've not intervened in those places. I mean, on the case of Syria in particular, you should recall, as I say, that the Syrian people have made it absolutely clear that they want absolutely no intervention in that manner. But no, I'm not under no illusions that this is you kind of have got to do what you can where you can, and we could in Libya, and we can't in Syria, and we couldn't in Bahrain, and also as is military intervention always the solution? Not necessarily.
Anyone? Yep.
I was just going to ask then, in that case, what would you consider triggers for military intervention, and under whose authority would you consider that under?
Sure. Right. I think look, the first ingredient has got to be that there is a single event or series of events that are really shocking. I mean, that is the sad truth. Attrition of life doesn't seem to cut it as far as the international community is concerned. If I kill 10 people a day, every day, for 100 years, that's not going to trigger an intervention the same way as if I were to kill 10 times 100. Whatever, you know what I'm saying? It's not going to trigger, as if you were to kill all those people on one day. But
because it's a norm, just people are used to it, or they're
because human beings are rubbish, and we're not perfect, and also it does take massive things to trigger our collective conscience, and would intervening to stop the deaths of 10,000 or 10 people a day rather, would that really make the situation better? Would it be considered proportional? These are things you have to, and so you look at what happened in Libya and in Tunisia and Egypt. Why was the international community suddenly galvanised in a way that we weren't 12 months ago? It was galvanised because all of a sudden, people were saying, inside those countries, we want change, we want change. And that's the second thing, that there has got to be massive internal demand for it. Because I think it's very, very hard. You can't just go intervening in a country if the people of that country haven't said that they want it. But, thirdly, as I say, I think it's got to be doable. You've got to have the resources to do it. The UN is international is international legitimacy in the form of the UN required. I think the answer to that, in practice, in my view, is yes.
Really?
But in theory, no. In principle, no.
Yeah.
Right? What I'm saying is, I don't like the fact that the Security Council, which has on its board China and Russia as permanent veto-wielding members, is the supreme moral arbiter of all things international. Yeah? This was an organisation that was founded, as I say, in the closing fires of World War II, when membership was dependent on two things. One, you were against Nazi Germany, as an ideology. But two, you're going to put your money where your mouth was and get stuck in. So, unsurprisingly, there was, the UN had this great legitimacy. We now have a situation where it retains the moral legitimacy that it's always had. The UN said it. Seems to be, well, obviously it must be right. It retains that moral legitimacy, and yet it counts North Korea, Zimbabwe, Burma, Iran as members. Yeah. So it's not the great moral bastion. And as I say, I think that in reality you do need quite a lot of the time Security Council authorization just to get that international legitimacy. But you look at what we did in Kosovo. There was no Security Council mandate there. I think it was the right thing to do. You look at Sierra Leone, likewise, there was no mandate. Libya, had we intervened without a Security Council resolution, it just wouldn't happen. It just depends on the situation at the time. But I am ambivalent about the UN as the supreme rule-making body. Now that does present a difficulty, because then you've got to say to yourself, so who the hell is in charge?
Yeah, exactly.
And this is the problem. The world is an anarchy, at least at the governmental level. There is no global government. There still are different governments, and they are all competing for their way in the world. And, the UN is not the global government. That's the problem. It's not the global government. It does not have the global legitimacy that everyone seems to think it should have, or does. It does have. And so I would say that the system is imperfect. Not until you have got a global government that everyone recognises and respects as absolutely in charge, and they'll follow all its rules, will you have a situation where you can say definitively, well, what's the right situation and what's the wrong situation to be. until that time, I think you do have to follow your conscience a bit. I think actually the responsibility to protect is the closest that we've got, which is this doctrine, as I said, that basically says, right, there's large-scale loss of life. That's the first condition. The government of the country is unable or unwilling to do anything about it. That's the second condition. But then thirdly, it does say, and the Security Council got to authorise it. I would take away the third point. I'd keep points 1 and 2, and I would add.
But is it an instant loss of? Is it like an instant loss of a lot of lives? Structural violence.
It's purposefully ambiguous.
Yeah.
You just have to judge in any given situation.
Yep. In the beginning of things with Libya, there seemed to have been some room for negotiations. Then with Gaddafi, then that was slowly dissipating, disappearing, and basically he was cornered in a way. So perhaps some of the atrocities were even worse because of that. Now, with that in mind, and also the interventions you just mentioned, and the sniper going to Zimbabwe, which I also think would be a good idea, how would you compare the two types of intervention? One, a team of special forces, whatever, or two, what we are watching on TV and which involves so much more loss of life, because it basically instigates kind of a civil war.
Oh, what do I think about sort of global
the interventions that do not happen, or at least we don't know about them, and the interventions that we do see?
It's an interesting question. I don't know. I am always cautious about, and this is. I mean, I've got taken up on this point on a few occasions. I was on Channel 4 the other day, so I'm not name dropping. It's just that's where it was, and this guy said to me, "Oh, you can't just pick and choose. That's a recipe for chaos." But as I say, I think that there are some cases where such action you can judge in those circumstances, in that context, is going to be the right thing. And the assassination of Osama bin Laden probably falls into that category. And there are other situations where you would say, well, that's going to be the wrong thing. I mean, you assassinate Mugabe, is there then going to be a power vacuum? And as it happens, probably not, because in my view, he's a geriatric now. His generals have been in charge for some time, and there is actually a bit of a power struggle going on there at the moment. Even if intervening might be the right thing to do in terms of getting rid of a regime, is it going to make it better or worse? And I think in some situations you can say, well, it'll make it better. Some situations you say, well, the balance is this is actually going to make things worse. And I know that's a horribly vague and fudgy answer. I just think that is the reality. You've got to judge each situation individually as it comes.
I'm sorry, I was not, perhaps I didn't question it right, but I was not asking you to compare whether to intervene or not to intervene, but between the interventions, like we mentioned Osama bin Laden, do you think something like that would have been more feasible, more efficient?
Oh, for Gaddafi?
Well, for example, yeah. We can talk Saddam, we can talk Milosevic. That was my question, sorry, perhaps I didn't...
Pass.
Smart.
Pass. I think it's such a... that certainly was not the resolution. And, assassinating Gaddafi was not part of the mix, Stopping the regime, facilitating regime change. And I actually think that had Gaddafi been captured, it would have been better, not least because I think for the transitional authorities to have had a chance to demonstrate that they are better than the last lot, that they are more accountable, would have been the right thing to do. But if Gaddafi had just suddenly disappeared in the middle of the night, I don't know what the hell would have happened. Because you've still got I don't think it makes because look, at the end of the day, then you've just got the regime beneath you. You cut off the head of the Hydra. Okay, he was very much the top. You could argue that the whole thing might have toppled, but certainly, if the rest of the framework was still in place, the odds are that someone else would have just taken his place. But I can't read the room. So, I think to be honest with you, those kind of assassinations, and then you really are getting into really very shaky legal territory. Is it all right to just go around knocking off leaders of governments? Probably not. So I'm going to say no. It wouldn't have been the best.
Okay, the last question. Anybody?